The thermal regulator in section C7 was making that noise again, a rhythmic wheeze that sounded like an asthmatic robot trying to whistle. I pressed my ear against the cool metal housing, listening to the mechanical symphony that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. 3 short wheezes, 1 long groan, then silence for exactly 4 seconds before the cycle repeated. At least something in this universe was predictable. "Benny, you down there playing doctor with the heating vents again?" Rodriguez's voice crackled through my comm unit, filled with the kind of amusement that suggested he'd caught me talking to machinery more than once. Which, to be fair, he had. "The diagnostic says everything's nominal, but she's clearly lying," I muttered into the comm, running my fingers along the thermal couplings. "Listen to this." I held the device closer to the regulator so Rodriguez could hear the mechanical complaint. A pause. Then, "Sounds fine to me, buddy. Maybe you need to get your ears checked. Or start dating actual people instead of air conditioning units. Very funny. At least my girlfriend doesn't spend half her time trying to kill me with recycled oxygen." I pulled out my sonic wrench and began adjusting the harmonic frequency of the cooling coils. The wheeze shifted to a more pleasant hum, like a contented cat made of titanium and good intentions. "Speaking of trying to kill you," Rodriguez continued, "you hear about the circus coming to town?" I paused mid-adjustment. In Rodriguez's vocabulary, circus could mean anything from a surprise inspection to an actual alien invasion. On the meridian's edge, both were equally likely and equally annoying. What kind of circus? The diplomatic kind. First contact protocols, fancy uniforms, the whole parade. We're apparently hosting some hotshot alien delegation. The Valdrani something or other. The sonic wrench slipped from my fingers and clattered against the deck plating. The Valdrani Confederacy. Here. On our rust bucket? Hey, show some respect for our rust bucket. She's got character. Rodriguez's chuckle buzzed through the static. But yeah, word is they've finally decided to grace humanity with their presence. Captain's having kittens about it. Engineering's been ordered to make everything presentable for advanced beings, whatever that means. I groaned and let my head thump against the thermal regulator, which responded with an offended clunk. The Valdrani were the stuff of legends in human space, mysterious, technologically superior, and about as social as hermit crabs with trust issues. They'd been watching human expansion for decades without so much as a "hello" or "please stop blowing things up." The fact that they were suddenly interested in conversation meant either humanity had finally impressed them, or we'd done something spectacularly wrong and they were coming to file a complaint. "When are they arriving?" I asked, already dreading the answer. 2 hours. Which means you've got exactly that long to make the lower decks look like something other than the intestines of a dying space whale. 2 hours. I scrambled to my feet, banging my knee against a protruding pipe in the process. "Rodriguez, you couldn't have mentioned this earlier? Like maybe when I was drinking my coffee instead of elbow deep in ventilation systems. Where's the fun in that? Besides, you work better under pressure. Like a diamond made of panic and engineering skills." I was already moving, gathering my tools with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years fixing things that shouldn't be broken but always were. The Meridian's Edge was a good ship, reliable in the way that old dogs and comfortable shoes were reliable, but she wasn't exactly what you'd call impressive. Her corridors were narrow, her walls were scuffed, and her lighting had that slightly yellow tinge that suggested the spectrum generators needed recalibrating sometime in the last century. "They're holding the meet and greet in Conference Room Alpha," Rodriguez added helpfully. "You know, the one with the good holographic projectors and the chairs that don't squeak when you sit down. The one where the environmental controls have been acting up for the past month." "The very same. Captain wants someone to babysit the systems during the meeting, make sure nothing embarrassing happens. Like the gravity failing or the air suddenly turning purple." I paused in my frantic tool gathering. Purple air. It happened once. Back in '87. Don't ask. The thought of sitting in the corner of a diplomatic meeting, watching important people say important things while I monitored atmospheric composition readings, filled me with the special kind of dread reserved for root canals and tax audits. I was much better with machines than people. Machines made sense. They had problems, you fixed them, they said thank you by not exploding. People were complicated. They had feelings and expectations and this annoying tendency to notice when you were trying to become invisible. Can't someone else do it? Someone more diplomatic? You mean someone who wears a clean uniform and remembers to comb their hair? Rodriguez's tone suggested he was grinning. Benny, you're the only tech on this ship who can tell when something's about to go wrong just by listening to it. The captain wants someone who can fix problems before the fancy aliens notice we have them. I looked down at my uniform, which was indeed neither clean nor pressed, and ran a hand through hair that had apparently decided to stage a rebellion while I wasn't paying attention. Fine. But I'm staying in the background. Way in the background. Like, behind the maintenance panels where nobody can see me. That's the spirit. Be one with the furniture. The next hour and a half passed in a blur of frantic cleaning, system checks, and muttered complaints directed at whoever had decided that hosting advanced alien civilizations was a good idea. Conference Room Alpha was actually in decent shape, if you ignored the coffee stain on the carpet that looked suspiciously like a map of Earth's spiral arm and the faint smell of ozone that suggested the atmospheric processors were working a little too hard. I ran diagnostics on everything I could think of, gravity generators, atmospheric controls, holographic projectors, even the automatic door sensors. The ship responded with a chorus of electronic chirps and beeps that roughly translated to, "Everything's fine, stop worrying, you're making me nervous." Thanks for the pep talk, I muttered to the nearest wall panel, which flickered its lights in what I chose to interpret as encouragement. The delegation began arriving 15 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Through the maintenance access panel where I'd positioned myself, I could hear the shuffle of feet, the rustle of dress uniforms, and the kind of hushed conversations that happened when people were trying to sound important and knowledgeable about things they'd only read about in briefing reports. Remember, these beings have technology that makes our best ships look like sailing vessels, someone was saying in the tone of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. Show respect, but don't grovel. We're representing the entire human colonial alliance here. What if they don't speak our language? Another voice asked. They do. They've been monitoring our communications for decades. The question is whether they'll want to. I adjusted my position behind the panel, trying to find a spot where I could monitor the environmental controls without accidentally eavesdropping on conversations that were probably classified 6 ways to Sunday. The atmospheric readings were steady, gravity was holding at a comfortable 1 g, and the temperature was maintaining the precise 22 degrees that some committee had determined was optimally diplomatic. A soft chime announced the arrival of the Valdrani ship at the docking port. Even through the layers of hull plating and deck infrastructure, I could feel something change in the ship's vibrations, a subtle shift in the harmonic frequency that suggested our visitors brought technology that played by entirely different rules than ours. Here we go, I whispered to the maintenance panel, which responded by displaying a readout that everything was still perfectly normal, thank you very much, and could I please stop fidgeting with the sensors. The first thing I noticed about the Valdrani was that they made absolutely no sound when they walked. Not the whisper of fabric, not the soft tap of footsteps on deck plating, nothing. It was like watching ghosts with excellent posture glide through the conference room. From my hiding spot behind the environmental control panel, I had a perfect view of the proceedings through the maintenance grill, and I was beginning to understand why our diplomatic corps had been having nervous breakdowns for the past week. "Welcome aboard the Meridian's Edge," Captain Morrison said, his voice carrying just the right amount of authority mixed with carefully calculated humility. "We're honored that you've chosen to meet with us." The Valdrani delegation had arranged themselves in what I assumed was some sort of formal configuration, though it looked more like an elegant dance formation than a military lineup. There were 5 of them, each tall and graceful in a way that made our human diplomats look like they'd been assembled from spare parts and good intentions. But it was their leader who commanded attention without seeming to try. She stood at the center of the group, and I found myself staring at those ears. Long and pointed, sweeping back from her skull in curves that somehow managed to be both alien and beautiful. Her hair was the color of starlight, if starlight could be woven into silk, and her eyes held depths that suggested she was seeing more than just the surface of things. When she moved, it was with a fluid grace that made gravity seem like a polite suggestion rather than a fundamental force. "The honor is shared," she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ship's hull resonate in frequencies I'd never heard before. The atmospheric sensors behind my panel started registering quantum fluctuations that shouldn't have been possible in normal space. "I am Envoy Silverwind of the Valdrani Confederacy. We have observed your species' progress with interest." Captain Morrison gestured to the conference table, which had been polished to a mirror finish for the occasion. "Please, be seated. We have much to discuss." The humans took their seats with the usual shuffling and chair-scraping that accompanied any formal gathering. The Valdrani simply flowed into position, their movements so synchronized it was like watching a choreographed piece performed by beings who understood physics better than physics understood itself. "Before we begin, Dr. Hendricks from the Xenobiology department said, consulting his tablet with the nervous energy of someone who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, "we wanted to express our fascination with your civilization's achievements. Your ships appear to operate on principles that challenge our current understanding of spacetime mechanics." Envoy Silverwind's expression remained neutral, but I caught what might have been amusement in the slight tilt of her head. "Your understanding is developing. This is natural for young species." "Young species?" Admiral Hayes shifted in his chair with the kind of movement that suggested his diplomatic training was warring with his military instincts. "Humanity has been exploring space for over 3 centuries. "Indeed," Silverwind said, and there was definitely amusement there now. "We have records of your first tentative steps beyond your home system. Quite charming, in the way that a child's first attempts at walking are charming." I had to bite my lip to keep from snorting with laughter. The atmospheric readings were still showing those impossible quantum fluctuations, and I was starting to suspect that the Valdrani's presence was affecting local spacetime in ways that made my instruments very confused. The gravity sensors were registering tiny variations that followed no pattern I recognized, and the electromagnetic field detectors were picking up harmonics that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've brought samples of our latest technological achievements," Dr. Chen from the research division said, activating a holographic display that showed humanity's most advanced starship designs. "Perhaps we could arrange some form of technological exchange." The Valdrani delegation observed the holographic ships with the kind of polite attention you might give to a child showing you their crayon drawings. One of them, a male with intricate patterns tattooed along his elongated ears, leaned toward Silverwind and whispered something in a language that sounded like music played on instruments made of crystallized time. "Your vessels are functional," Silverwind said diplomatically. "They will serve adequately for your current needs." "Current needs?" Admiral Hayes leaned forward. "We're expanding into 12 new systems this year alone. Our fleet represents the pinnacle of human engineering." "Of course," Silverwind agreed, in the tone of someone humoring a particularly earnest toddler. "Your progress is commendable within the constraints of your current understanding of dimensional mechanics." I watched Dr. Chen's face cycle through confusion, realization, and what looked like the early stages of an existential crisis. It was becoming clear that humanity's proudest achievements were the equivalent of stone tools to a civilization that had figured out how to fold space like origami. "Perhaps," Captain Morrison said, smoothly redirecting the conversation with the skill of someone who'd spent years preventing diplomatic incidents, "we could discuss areas where our civilizations might find mutual benefit." Silverwind's attention seemed to sharpen, though her expression remained serene. "Mutual benefit. Yes, this is why we have come." She paused, and I swear I felt the ship's temporal sensors hiccup. "Your species possesses certain qualities that we find intriguing." "Such as?" Dr. Hendricks asked, stylus poised over his tablet like he was about to take notes on the meaning of existence. You adapt, Silverwind said simply. You encounter the impossible and find ways to make it possible. You discover that your fundamental assumptions about reality are incorrect, and instead of despair, you feel excitement. This is unusual. Most species, another Valdrani added, her voice carrying the same impossible harmonics, when they realize the true nature of the universe, become paralyzed by the implications. They retreat into comfortable illusions rather than face the complexity of what is. But humans, Silverwind continued, seem to thrive on having their worldview shattered and rebuilt. You call it scientific progress and treat it as a form of entertainment. Admiral Hayes cleared his throat. I'm not sure I'd call quantum mechanics entertaining. No. Silverwind's ears twitched in what I was learning to recognize as amusement. Yet your species regularly produces individuals who dedicate their lives to studying phenomena that exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously, for no reason other than curiosity. You build machines to observe particles that technically don't exist until observed, and when they behave in ways that violate everything you thought you knew about cause and effect, you write papers about it and give each other awards. She had a point. Put that way, humanity did sound slightly unhinged. There is value in such flexibility, Silverwind continued. The universe is far stranger than your current theories suggest. Most civilizations, when they discover this, choose comfortable stagnation over uncomfortable growth. But humans. She paused, and those deep eyes seemed to look right through the conference room walls. Humans might actually survive the discovery. The environmental sensors behind my panel were going completely haywire now, registering energy patterns that looked like someone was playing hopscotch with the fundamental constants of physics. Whatever the Valdrani used for technology, it was making my carefully calibrated instruments have what could only be described as a nervous breakdown. Survive what discovery? Dr. Hendricks asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to know. Silverwind smiled, and for a moment, the air in the room seemed to shimmer with possibilities that existed just outside the range of human perception. That this universe you think you inhabit, she said gently, is only the first layer of something far more complex. And that layer is about to undergo some rather significant changes. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people simultaneously realizes they're in way over their heads and there's no shallow end in sight. The diplomatic silence stretched on for what felt like several geological ages, though my chronometer insisted it had only been 12 seconds. I could practically hear the gears grinding in every human brain as they tried to process the casual way Envoy Silverwind had just suggested that reality was about to get a major software update. Admiral Hayes was the first to recover, clearing his throat with the authority of someone who'd spent decades dealing with situations that didn't make sense. When you say significant changes, could you be more specific? Silverwind's elongated ears twitched in that way I was beginning to recognize as her version of a barely suppressed smile. Your species has a delightful tendency to ask for specifics about things that exist outside your current conceptual framework. It would be like explaining quantum mechanics to a particularly intelligent goldfish. I resent that comparison, Dr. Chen muttered. Goldfish have excellent memories, actually. That's a myth about. The point, Silverwind continued smoothly, is that your language lacks the necessary vocabulary. You would need approximately 47 new mathematical concepts just to understand the question, let alone the answer. Behind my maintenance panel, the quantum sensors were having what could only be described as a complete emotional breakdown. The readings looked like someone had fed a physics textbook through a blender and then tried to reassemble it using interpretive dance. I tapped the display, hoping to coax it back to something resembling coherent data, but it just flickered and showed me a reading that suggested gravity was currently flowing sideways through dimensions that didn't technically exist. Perhaps, Captain Morrison said with the diplomatic skill of someone who'd learned to navigate conversations with beings whose idea of small talk involved restructuring spacetime, we could start with something more foundational. What exactly do the Valdrani want from humanity? The question hung in the air like a soap bubble made of pure tension. The entire delegation seemed to consider this with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for defusing antimatter bombs or explaining to your spouse why you forgot your anniversary. What we want, Silverwind said slowly, is something your species has in abundance, though you seem largely unaware of it. Our charming naivety. Dr. Hendricks suggested, stylus still poised over his tablet as if he could somehow take notes on the fundamental restructuring of reality. Your chaos, another Valdrani said, speaking for the first time. This one had intricate silver patterns woven through her hair that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. Most advanced civilizations eventually eliminate chaos from their existence. They achieve perfect order, perfect predictability, perfect stagnation. But humans, Silverwind continued, seem to generate chaos as a natural byproduct of existence. You take perfectly orderly situations and find ways to introduce uncertainty, creativity, and what you call, thinking outside the box. That's just problem solving, Admiral Hayes said, though he sounded slightly defensive. Any intelligent species would they? The silver-haired Valdrani tilted her head, and the patterns in her hair rippled like water disturbed by a stone. Most species, when faced with a locked door, attempt to find the key. Humans try the key, then pick the lock, then try to convince the door it was never locked in the first place, and finally resort to removing the entire wall while loudly debating whether doors are really necessary for civilized society. I had to press my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. She wasn't wrong. Humanity did have a talent for approaching problems from angles that didn't technically exist until we invented them. Your species, Silverwind said, has managed to maintain this beautiful, chaotic creativity even as you've developed advanced technology. This is unprecedented. So you want us to stay chaotic? Captain Morrison asked, understandably confused. We want you to help us remember how, Silverwind said, and for the first time, her serene composure cracked slightly. The Valdrani Confederacy has existed for 12,000 of your years. We have achieved wonders that would seem like magic to your current understanding. We can fold space, manipulate time, exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. She paused, and the air in the room seemed to grow heavier with unspoken weight. And we are dying of perfection. The environmental sensors behind my panel chose that moment to register something that made my eyes water just looking at it. According to the readouts, the local fabric of spacetime was being gently massaged by forces that operated according to mathematics I was pretty sure hadn't been invented yet. The atmospheric composition was still normal, but the quantum foam underlying reality was showing patterns that looked suspiciously like alien sheet music. Dying. Dr. Hendricks looked up from his tablet with the expression of someone who just realized he was taking notes on his own existential crisis. Not physically, the silver-haired Valdrani explained. Our bodies are sustained by technology that makes aging and disease irrelevant. But our minds, our souls, if you will, have become as predictable as clockwork. We know everything, understand everything, can predict everything. There are no more surprises, no more discoveries, no more moments of wonder. That sounds. Dr. Chen started, then stopped, apparently realizing that any response would sound either insulting or terrifying. Peaceful. Silverwind suggested. Serene. Yes, it is. It is also a form of death that occurs while you're still breathing. We have spent centuries searching for a solution, and we believe we have found it in the most unlikely place. She gestured toward the holographic display that still showed humanity's proudest starship designs. Your species represents something we had thought impossible, intelligent chaos. You have developed technology sophisticated enough to be interesting, yet you remain unpredictable enough to be surprising. Admiral Hayes shifted in his chair with the slow deliberation of someone who just realized the conversation had taken a turn into territory not covered by any diplomatic manual. Are you suggesting some kind of cultural exchange? We are suggesting, Silverwind said, a partnership. We provide you with technology that will advance your civilization by millennia. In return, you provide us with something far more valuable, the chance to remember what it feels like to be surprised. The silence that followed this statement was different from the previous ones. This wasn't the silence of confusion or shock. This was the silence of a room full of people trying to calculate the implications of being offered godlike technology in exchange for humanity's natural talent for making things complicated. What exactly would this partnership involve? Captain Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he was bracing for an answer that would require forms he didn't have and approval from committees that didn't exist yet. Small steps initially, Silverwind said. Joint research projects. Cultural exchanges. Perhaps a few Valdrani observers stationed on human vessels to study your methods. Our methods? Dr. Chen looked confused. What methods? Your approach to problem solving, the silver-haired Valdrani explained. Your tendency to find 17 different solutions to every problem, 3 of which shouldn't work but do anyway, 4 of which violate known physics but function perfectly, and at least 1 of which involves duct tape. I nearly choked trying to suppress my laughter. In the past month alone, I'd seen humanity's finest engineers fix a quantum computer with percussive maintenance, reroute a starship's power grid using coffee filters, and solve a complex navigation problem by asking the ship's AI what it would do if it were feeling lucky. We've forgotten how to think that way, Silverwind continued. We've become so efficient, so logical, so perfectly rational that we've lost the ability to make intuitive leaps or lucky guesses. We need to relearn chaos, and you are the best teachers we could find. The quantum sensors were now showing readings that suggested reality was having a polite disagreement with itself about what was supposed to be happening. The ship's temporal field generators were registering fluctuations that followed no pattern except possibly the rhythm of alien breathing, and the gravitational sensors were picking up harmonics that sounded like someone humming a lullaby to the fundamental forces of physics. This is all very flattering, Admiral Hayes said slowly, but I'm not sure our chaos is something we can just teach. No, Silverwind agreed. It must be experienced. Lived. Which is why we propose that selected Valdrani individuals be embedded with human crews, to observe and participate in your daily operations. She paused, and those impossibly deep eyes seemed to focus on something beyond the conference room walls, something that made the air itself hold its breath. Starting with this vessel. The moment Envoy Silverwind announced that the Valdrani wanted to embed observers on the Meridian's edge, the careful diplomatic atmosphere in Conference Room Alpha evaporated like water in a vacuum. Captain Morrison's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and what looked suspiciously like the early stages of panic, while Admiral Hayes gripped his stylus so tightly I was surprised it didn't snap. Embedded observers, DR. Hendricks repeated, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd just been told his goldfish wanted to join the space program. On this ship. Our ship. The Meridian's edge represents an ideal environment for our purposes, Silverwind explained with the serene confidence of someone who just suggested the most reasonable thing in the universe. A working vessel with active research operations, diverse crew dynamics, and... She paused, those elongated ears twitching with barely contained amusement, a maintenance staff renowned for creative problem-solving. Behind my panel, the quantum sensors had given up all pretense of measuring anything comprehensible and were now displaying what appeared to be a recipe for chocolate cake written in mathematical symbols that hurt to look at. I was beginning to suspect that the Valdrani's presence was causing reality to develop a sense of humor about itself. How many observers are we talking about? Captain Morrison asked, already calculating berth assignments and dietary requirements in his head. Initially, just 1, Silverwind said. A cultural attaché who can begin the process of understanding your operational methodologies. And who would this attaché be? Admiral Hayes inquired, though his tone suggested he was already regretting asking. Silverwind's smile was like watching starlight learn to be mischievous. Myself. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ship's atmospheric processors humming 3 decks away. Dr. Chen's tablet slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the conference table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. You, Captain Morrison said slowly, want to live on our ship. To observe your daily operations, yes. To understand how your species maintains such delightful unpredictability while achieving functional technological advancement. Silverwind's eyes sparkled with something that might have been anticipation. I am particularly interested in your maintenance protocols. My blood froze. The environmental sensors behind my panel chose that moment to register readings that suggested the local laws of physics were taking a coffee break, but I barely noticed. The most advanced being in known space was interested in maintenance protocols. My maintenance protocols. Our maintenance protocols, Dr. Hendricks said faintly, are standard. Are they? The silver-haired Valdrani leaned forward with interest. We have observed your vessel's repair logs. Last month, your crew restored functionality to a damaged quantum computer by, and I quote, percussive recalibration and aggressive encouragement. That was a special case, Admiral Hayes said quickly. The primary repair protocols had failed, and our technician improvised a solution. Exactly, Silverwind said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who just proven a particularly elegant theorem. Improvisation. Adaptation. The willingness to try solutions that shouldn't work but somehow do. This is what we need to understand. I pressed my face against the maintenance grill, watching the humans try to process the idea that their biggest diplomatic weakness, humanity's tendency to fix things with enthusiasm rather than expertise, was apparently their greatest strength. There would need to be protocols, Captain Morrison said, shifting into full diplomatic mode. Security clearances, cultural briefings, accommodation arrangements, of course, Silverwind agreed. I understand that integrating an alien observer into your crew operations requires careful planning. I am prepared to follow all necessary procedures. The thing is, Dr. Chen said, apparently recovering from his tablet dropping incident, most of our daily operations are, well, they're not very exciting. A lot of routine maintenance, system checks, paperwork. Paperwork? Silverwind's ears perked up with what looked like genuine fascination. You still use physical documentation for operational records? Not physical, Dr. Hendricks corrected. Digital files, but we call them paperwork because, well, we've always called them paperwork. Fascinating. A linguistic holdover from earlier technological phases that persists despite its functional irrelevance. Your species maintains cultural artifacts embedded in language even when they no longer serve practical purposes. Silverwind looked positively delighted. This is exactly the kind of beautiful inefficiency we need to study. Admiral Hayes rubbed his temples with the slow deliberation of someone who just realized that everything he'd thought was normal was actually deeply weird. I'll need to contact Fleet Command for authorization. This kind of arrangement requires approval from. He was interrupted by a soft chime from the ship's communications system, followed by Captain Morrison's voice over the intercom. All crew members, we have just received priority authorization from Colonial Command for expanded diplomatic cooperation with our Valdrani guests. Department heads report to Conference Room Alpha for briefing. The Admiral stared at the wall speaker with the expression of someone who just witnessed causality work backwards. How did they? Time flows differently when you're not limited to linear thinking, Silverwind said gently. We may have mentioned our intentions to your superiors before arriving here. Before arriving here? Dr. Chen's voice cracked slightly. How long before? 6 months, give or take a few decades. Temporal mechanics can be imprecise when you're crossing dimensional boundaries. I watched the human delegation collectively realize that they'd been having a conversation that had been predetermined by beings who existed partially outside of normal time. The environmental sensors behind my panel were now showing readings that suggested the ship was simultaneously in 3 different locations, none of which were where we'd started. So this was all. Captain Morrison gestured vaguely at the conference table, the holographic displays, the carefully prepared diplomatic presentations. Theater, Silverwind confirmed cheerfully. Necessary theater, but theater nonetheless. Your species responds well to the illusion of choice, even when the outcome has already been determined by forces beyond your current understanding. That's either very comforting or absolutely terrifying, Dr. Hendricks muttered. Both, Silverwind agreed. Another example of your species' remarkable ability to hold contradictory concepts simultaneously without experiencing cognitive breakdown. Most civilizations find paradox paralyzing. Humans find it Tuesday. The conference room door chimed, and Rodriguez's voice crackled through my comm unit. Benny, you still babysitting the environmental controls in there? Because I'm getting some really weird readings from the lower decks. The thermal regulators are humming something that sounds suspiciously like alien music. I keyed my comm with the quiet desperation of someone who just realized their nice, simple life was about to become very complicated. The readings are unusual, but everything's stable. Define unusual. Because according to my instruments, section C7 is currently existing in a state of quantum superposition while maintaining perfect thermal equilibrium. Which, according to everything I know about physics, should be impossible. Through the maintenance grill, I saw Silverwind's head turn slightly, those impossibly keen eyes scanning the room with sudden interest. Quantum superposition in thermal regulation systems, she murmured. Fascinating. Your maintenance staff has achieved dimensional variance stabilization without understanding the underlying principles. Are what now? Admiral Hayes asked weakly. The thermal regulator in section C7, Silverwind continued, her attention focused with laser intensity on something beyond the conference room walls. It has been modified to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, allowing it to maintain perfect efficiency across varying environmental conditions. This should require technology we thought your species wouldn't develop for another 3 centuries. My blood turned to ice water. She was talking about my thermal regulator. The one I'd been fixing for months, adjusting and tweaking until it hummed just right. The one that had been making that weird noise until I'd figured out how to make it sing instead. That's impossible, Dr. Chen said. Our maintenance staff doesn't have access to dimensional manipulation technology. No, Silverwind said slowly, her voice carrying a note of growing wonder. But they have something potentially more valuable. Intuitive understanding. The ability to find solutions that work without necessarily understanding why they work. She stood, her movement fluid and purposeful, and began walking toward the back of the conference room. Toward my maintenance panel. Your thermal systems technician, she said, each word precise and inevitable. I would very much like to meet them. My hands were shaking as I tried to keep my calm, but it was too late. Silverwind had reached the maintenance panel, and those alien eyes were looking directly through the grill at my hiding spot. Hello, she said, her voice warm with the kind of delight usually reserved for unexpected presence. I believe we have much to discuss. I stared back at her through the grill, wrench still in my hand, and realized that my comfortable, invisible life had just ended. In its place was something vast and strange and utterly terrifying. I said, which pretty much summed up how I felt about the entire situation. Silverwind smiled, and the universe held its breath. You.